Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of What's New in Prisma. My name is Nicholas Berg. I'm the lead of the developer advocacy team over here at Prisma, and I'm here with my colleague Sabin. Hey Sabin, how are you today?
Hey, doing well. Very, very good so far.
Actually, I just thought about this. This show, What's New in Prisma, I think we're coming up to our 2-year anniversary. I think we started it pretty much around this time of the year 2 years ago. So maybe we should think about something special to do for our 2-year anniversary when it's coming up.
We should do like a challenge on stream, something to embarrass the whole team. That'd be good.
Yeah, or we bring the entire team on, also with Alex and Tassin, who some of the viewers might have seen here before. Would be a fun thing. All right, we have quite an exciting stream today. I'm really looking forward to everything because we'll, of course, talk about this week's release that we have released on Tuesday, version 4.3 of Prisma, with a couple of really nice and exciting features, I think. So I'm looking forward to talking through these. And I think you also prepared a demo so that we can actually show the people what that has been about. Then we have a guest today who is going to talk about an open source project that he's building based on Prisma. So that's going to be interesting. And Sabin, you also are working on a tutorial series at the moment. I think you're going really in depth on GraphQL, React, a couple of interesting technologies there. So I'm looking forward to chat with you about this in a little bit more detail as well. And then in the end, I also want to talk about an upcoming feature of Prisma, one that we haven't released yet, but one that we're looking or seeking feedback for. And that's Prisma client extensions. So I'll talk a little bit about this in the end as well. So without further ado, let's jump into the release notes. All right, here are the release notes for version 4.3, and they start with the field reference support on query filters that we just released in preview. And this is a really cool feature because it enables one of these workflows that previously in Prisma really has only been possible if you were using raw SQL queries. What this basically allows you to do is to have a single Prisma query where you include a filter. And in that filter, you're now able to compare two columns of a particular model. And that's really handy because in the past, that wasn't possible before. You had to have the value that you would compare to the existing value on the model that would have been an external value. So either a variable or a hard-coded value that you would have dropped in there. And now you can actually compare two columns of the same model against each other. And I'm not going to talk too much about this because Sabin, you're going to show what this looks like in a little bit. So I'm saving that for your demo. So if you scroll down a little bit, then we are ending up at the next feature. This is the count by filtered relation. And what this allows you to do is that you can now define Prisma client queries where you, I think, include a count. If you scroll down a little bit to the query, in the select option that allows you to select specific fields when you're querying for a model. So in this case, we have the user model here. We are calling find many on it. And the select option, it usually allows you to select specific fields of that user model to be returned in the reply. So in this case, I think the user model has 4 or 5 fields. I see the email, the name, the post, the ID. And if I only wanted to retrieve the name of all the users, for example, I could use the select option. But in this case, we broadened the scope of this select option to not only include the fields of a model, but also to include a count value. And on this one, you're now able to filter. So that's the new thing. The count, I think that was available previously already, but now you can even filter on the count based on a relation value. So here I could ask for all the user that have posts which are published. And I think you're also going to demo that later.
Yeah.
Then another really exciting feature, that's the multi-schema support, and it's now in preview. it is here described as an experimental or a very early preview. And we also kind of intentionally didn't include a code snippet for what this actually looks like. This is really for everybody who wants to work on the bleeding edge and try out the very new things. But this only works, as far as I'm aware, it only works at the moment if you actually write your schema manually for an existing database. So you can't use Prisma Migrate with that feature, and you also can't use introspection. So it's not close to being production ready with this setup, of course. But if you're eager to already explore and look into this, you could go and set up your own Postgres or SQL Server database, define 2 different schemas, define your tables within these schemas, and then manually write the Prisma schema for this with a new syntax. And then you should be able to use Prisma Client to already query these schemas. So that's something that you can already explore, but it's definitely also a feature that you're going to hear a lot more about in the next couple of weeks. And I also spoke about this feature in my talk at Prisma Day, actually, a couple of weeks ago. So in the end, I'm going to drop a link to my Prisma Day talk, because I also talked about Prisma Client extensions. And if you want to learn more about these 2 features, you can refer to my talk from a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in real quick about that one. That was a, there's been a lot of people wanting this feature, and actually this GitHub issue is super popular. But it is a pretty complicated feature. Doing something like this is it's a pretty hefty task. So we do really want a lot of feedback. So if you do try it, please leave feedback in that GitHub issue, because we're actively monitoring it.
Yes. And then we have a couple of fixes. So Prisma CLI exit code fixes. And I read through the release notes here. And so I think that as application developers who are building kind of maybe front end or back end or full stack apps, we're not typically concerned with these kinds of exit codes. In fact, I don't think I've used them much. The main context from where I can recall having used them is from university when I was building C programs. And I think maybe in the realm of systems programming, or when you're building a CLI, these are much more relevant. So what this basically means is that the exit code 0, like when a program that's running on your operating system is exiting with the exit code 0, it indicates that it exits successfully, and any other exit code from 1 to 255 are the possible values there, indicates that it's a failure. And in this case, for example, for the Prisma migrate dev command, which for an initial migration also triggers the Prisma DB seed command. When that happened and the seeding failed, but the migration was successful, the command would still terminate with the exit code 0. But in our case, or like in this case, the seeding actually failed. So we want to indicate that to people who depend on that, and we're now returning exit code 1. So it's just one of the examples how we are now adjusting the exit codes there.
Yeah, I didn't realize how important those exit codes were until I started working on this super secret CLI tool that I'm building. And I've gotten to dive into that world. And so this feature got me pretty excited when I saw it.
All right. Yeah. I'm sure you'll be demoing this in a future What's New in Prisma episode, by the way, your CLI there. It's going to be interesting for a lot of our users, I think. Then we have improved precision for the tracing preview feature. So some improvements for the tracing, thanks to your feedback. Prisma format now uses WebAssembly, which I think is very interesting. And then some fixes for MongoDB queries, for JSON filters. So just making Prisma more robust, more stable overall. And then this last one, I think, is also really nice. It's just like little details like this, I think, that make working with Prisma really delightful, that we invest time into the tools that people use when working with Prisma. In this case, the VS Code extension has gotten a little bit of an update and a makeover here, in that in the outline on the left side, in the like in the side nav in VS Code, you now see dedicated icons for the different blocks. And some functionality when you hover over fields. So yeah, overall, just making the experience of Prisma in VS Code even better. All right. I think these were the most important parts, the Prisma client extension request for comments here. I mentioned that in the beginning. We are going to talk about this at the end of the stream. So if you're curious, then hang on. Yeah, I also want to mention that if you have any questions about Prisma, about the company, about the product, then feel free to drop that in the chat. We'll pick them up in the end and answer them. All right, Sabin, with that, I think I'll hand over to you. And I'm looking forward to the demos that you've prepared for our 2 new preview features here.
Yeah, for sure. I'll pop open my screen. How's the font size on that? Does that look okay?
I can see it very clearly. If anyone wants to complain or is complaining in the comments, I'll let you know.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to be going over the 2 new bigger features that we released, which are field references that Niko mentioned, and then also the filter relation counts. So I'll show a little bit of an example of that. But the first thing that I wanted to take a look at really quick is I'm popping open my schema over here. And if I can get this, I want to show the outline.
Oh, yeah.
So this is that new VS Code feature that Niko just mentioned. And I actually think this one's really exciting, probably just as exciting as the other pieces, because we get a lot of people talking about having really big schemas and having a hard time navigating through them. And I think while we're working on multi-schemas and splitting out schemas into multiple files, I think this is a good solution in the intermediate so that you can actually navigate and sort of find where things are quickly. So yeah, feel free to check this out. I think VS Code should update the extension automatically. So go check that out if you have a chance and let us know what you think.
Awesome.
But with that, yeah, I'll jump back into the demo over here. So I've just got a couple of queries that I've run. I shouldn't have closed my schema. So if we see here, we've got a user and a post. So this is a really simple schema. It's just a simple one-to-many relationship. And then a post has views and likes. And the goals with our queries are going to be to sort of compare the views to the likes and see which posts are more popular. So we're going to say if a post has the same amount of views as it has likes, then it must be a good one because everyone liked it. So if we pop into the query here, the first one that we're going to do is finding all users with popular posts. So all users with posts that are greater than 5 likes. So we can do that now using that new count relation that Niko had mentioned. So we're selecting all users, we're finding their name, and then we're going to count all of the posts where the likes are greater than 5. And so previously this was impossible. Previously you had to select a completely separate query and sort of mesh the data together and then filter it down. But now that we have this option here, we can just run it straight in this one query. And I'll actually comment out the rest of these queries that we're going to go over so that I can run one by itself. And I'll run npm run dev.
Yeah, so this kind of functionality, if you wanted to do it previously in Prisma, it would have meant that you probably would have to send 2 queries or default or like drop down to raw SQL. And with this new like addition to the Prisma client API, you can now do this natively.
Yeah, exactly. And so what you see here is we get a list back, and I would just console log date in table form. And so we can see that me and Niko both have popular posts. I have one post that has greater than 5 likes, and Niko has 2 of them. And just so you're aware, in the seed data, we do have 3 users, and Joe Prisma over here didn't have any popular posts. So bummer for him, but yeah, we're going to pick on him a lot through this demo. The next one is finding posts with as many likes as views. So here we get to use the field reference. Back over in the schema, we had the likes and view counts. And this is a pretty common scenario in sort of like a blog setting where you have likes and views that are just a counter that goes up. And so with this new feature where we can reference other fields within the query, we can actually check to see if the likes equals the amount of views. That way we know if everyone's liking it or not. And then you can sort of do some analytics on maybe what needs to change there. So if I make sure this is saved, I run this query, then we should see that me and Niko also have posts that have just as many likes as views. But unfortunately, Joe doesn't.
And this is also a really great feature because a lot of people actually have been asking about this in the past. And I believe we even have a help article in our documentation to tell people how to do this in raw SQL. Or at least I'm not 100% sure if we have that, but I know that we wanted to have it. I think we have it because it was like such a common feature request. And like we told people, okay, it's not possible at the moment, but here's a workaround. And this is a case I think that comes up often also, for example, in the case like when you're like working with like paid amounts with invoices or something like this, you want to see if like if an amount was already paid, if it's higher than the like already paid amount, things like this. It also works on dates, I think. So if you have two date column on a model and you want to know, okay, is this is the order date greater than the shipping date or something like this, you can compare this now as well. So a lot more flexibility with the Prisma Client API.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the type safety here, you actually get any of the comparison operators that you would have gotten in a normal filter. So there's a bunch of different options here. I've stuck to the example of numbers, but like Niko said, you can do any sort of values here. You can even check if things contain certain values and do some stuff like that. So
nice.
So the last example here is we're going to be looking for users with a count of their popular posts. So what this is going to be is selecting all users who have posts that have just as many likes as views. So I'll uncomment this guy. And so just walking through the query here, we're looking for the users and we're finding many. And then we're just selecting out the name and then we're selecting out this count. And within this count, we are dropping down to the related field, which is the posts. And then we're filtering that down to where the likes equals the views. So like Niko was just saying, I can't even remember how many comments in the Prisma Slack channel I've gotten asking how to do things like this. And I always feel so bad, and I grit my teeth together and tell them, yeah, you got to do that in raw SQL. But now it's possible to do through here. So that's pretty exciting to me. If we run this, awesome. And we get to see this last query. So we see I have one post with as many views as likes. Niko has one, and Joe doesn't have any. So poor Joe, he didn't do very well today, but he did a good job showing our example, though.
All right, yeah, I really like your setup also, how you're using chalk there to color the terminal, the table output. Very nicely represented all the data there.
Cool, thanks. I had extra time and I thought I'd make it look pretty. So
amazing. All right, thank you for the demo, Sabin. So I think with that, we can transition over and invite up our guest for today. So let's go ahead and invite up Luke. Hello, Luke.
Hey guys, how's it going?
So we're doing great. We're doing great. Luke, you are an indie software developer based out of London. Is that right?
Yeah, that's fairly recent, but yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right now. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. We invited you on the stream today because you're working on an open source app that's called Rally. And you're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. But before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself and just maybe give us a little bit of background how you ended up in open source development?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started kind of doing open source full time just this year. Before that, I was freelancing for quite a few years. And yeah, I mean, I've been a developer all my life, and I've kind of been bouncing around doing like front end, back end. I've done some DevOps as well. So you can say I've been a kind of a jack of all trades. So I've always wanted to kind of build like a product and see if I can actually do it. And Rally is just something I actually built quite a long time ago. Like it's been around for like over 7 years now, but it started as like just a side project. I remember at the time, I just having worked at like startups and all my code was like closed source. So I just wanted something to show the people, and that's how I built Rally. It just seemed like a simple product that I could build in a reasonable amount of time. And yeah, it was just there for quite a few years until this year. I just decided to rebuild it, and I'm kind of focusing my time on it.
So you actually like rebuilt this version of Rally, and like how or why did you rebuild it? Was it written with a different stack before, and you switched to new technologies now?
Yeah, so when I wrote it, I hadn't even started working with React at all. It was an Angular app. It had a MongoDB backend. It was a completely different stack and very
The
close.
2015 stack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. What was it called? The mean stack. Yeah, I was using the mean stack. And yeah, but very close. Like after I launched it, after a few months, I like moved to using React, and I quickly kind of started losing grip of like the whole stack. So it became very hard to maintain. It's just something that I left it running and people kept using it. And only this year it kind of started picking up steam. Like there were more users coming in, and I thought, I should probably do something with this. I've been meaning to rebuild it for a long time, and I decided that, yeah, like this year is gonna be the year. I've been waiting for a long time to do this. You could say I've been waiting for Prisma to kind of come into its own, to be honest, because I remember trying multiple times to like try and build it before Prisma even existed, when there was GraphQL first, and then I think that there was something in between. I can't remember the
Prisma
name.
One.
Yeah, Prisma. I tried Prisma One as well. I think they didn't have a different name. Like there was something with a different name. I remember the website being
Nexus
yellow or
maybe.
something. Nexus. Yeah, I
We
tried that.
yeah, for a while we had something that we called the Nexus framework that was based
Yeah,
on the GraphQL Nexus schema library basically, and
yeah,
we wanted to push that before we realized that it's actually not the best idea for us to try and tell people what kind of stack they should be using, but rather focus on just making a great tools for databases that work with any stack, with any technology that people would be using. So we kind of like drifted away a little bit from the focus on Nexus and GraphQL and just like focused on building a great ORM.
yeah. And that was an excellent call. I think. I think. Yeah, the problem is I was always trying to build it like as a part-time thing, and it was just really hard to kind of wrap my head around all uh, the details of like the technology was changing so much. With like you guys were making a lot of progress, and every time I came back to it, there was like new stuff that I had to like learn. So I was just waiting for things to settle down. I think now is kind of a really good time to be like a bootstrapper. Like building your own product. It's so much more achievable these days than it was a few years ago.
That's great. Okay, before we start talking about Rally in a little bit more detail, I'm curious about like how did you first hear about Prisma and how did you become a part of the Prisma community?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think I remember when I was still living in Berlin. I remember meeting Johannes Schickling was the CEO at the time when they were still building GraphQL, and I really liked the idea then of what they were doing, and I just kept following along, and I tried every single thing that they were coming out with,
All right.
and like Prisma 2 was probably the one that really felt like it unlocked a lot of potential for me. Um, so I've just been trying everything that's been coming out, and like finally I found something that kind of works for me.
That's really great to hear and also very validating because like for me, I also have been around since the early days, since GraphQL, since 2017. And I share that same feeling that for a long time, it felt like what we were releasing was not what we wanted people to use. We weren't quite there. And only with Prisma 2, with the ORM that we fully launched for production only last summer, or yeah, like a year ago, actually, 1.5 years ago, it was fully complete with Prisma Migrate. Only that was the big step forward that allowed us to actually like start getting the adoption that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
And in our conversation beforehand, you also told me that you attended Prisma Day in Berlin, actually. And yeah, I was curious, what was your kind of personal highlight from the conference? Any talks or interactions with community members that you found memorable?
Yeah, I mean, the talks were really great. I really, really I think the turnout was really good, and there were some very interesting people there. I think just by coincidence, like I had started contacting Alex, the guy who makes TRPC, like maybe a few weeks before that happened, and he turned out to be going there too. So then I got to meet him in person there, and that was really, really cool. Very, very inspiring to see like what he's doing as well.
Nice. Yeah, Alex is great. We're actually trying to have him on this show as well in one of the upcoming episodes.
Yeah, he's really good.
All right, so let's shift gears and talk a little bit about Rally. So what kind of app is Rally actually? We've mentioned it a couple of times, but like, what does it do? How would you like pitch it to our audience here?
So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's like a completely original idea, right? It's inspired heavily by like doodle.com, and it's been around for like over 15 years. And the aim is it helps people schedule group meetings. So finding a common time and date to host an event. And yeah, that's basically it. You can create like a poll where people can choose what days or times they're available, and that helps people find the best possible time to host an event.
Nice. Would you be open to maybe sharing your screen and maybe like showing the app for a little bit so that people like can get an impression of what it looks like, what the UI looks like, and like the main workflows?
Sure, yeah.
All right.
Let me know when you can see my screen.
I have your screen here. And by the way, it seems like we lost Sabin. I think I saw his video becoming black due to battery issues. So like we'll see when he returns, but it's not a big deal.
It's been the power issues in Germany.
Already starting.
Yeah.
Well, actually, he's based in California, so like
for
it's
right.
a bit different.
Oh, don't know then. Cool. So you can see my screen, right?
Yes, it's there.
Cool. Yeah, so this is just the landing page, and just to show really quickly, there's this option to see a live demo, which creates like a quick demo poll for you with like fake data. And basically, this is kind of what the end result would be when you create a poll. You get something where you can give your participants some information, and when people go to the page, they would just simply type in their name. They can choose which days they're available. There's also the option to say, I can come if need be, and you just add that in. So it's quite a simple end result. Like the complications come more when there's also the possibility of adding quite a lot of options and a lot of participants. So just being able to handle that, can get pretty complicated. And yeah, there's also the option to leave comments, which people seem to quite like a lot. That's something that's missing in other products that are similar. And people seem to really like the ability to kind of leave comments on the page and be able to discuss it a bit more.
Nice.
And yeah, and just to see like if I want to create a new poll here, I'll just call it monthly meetup. I don't have to put in location or description. And there's like two options to choose when you kind of select.
It's a beautiful UI, much more modern and much more beautiful than Doodle, I think.
Yeah, I have to give it up to Tailwind that it's been quite a lot of help when it comes to like making things look polished. But yeah, it's also kind of why I decided to build this, because I remember I was using Doodle a lot at the time, and with the ads and the slightly outdated UI, sometimes it felt like there could be something quite a lot better. I just saw like a lot of potential there. So that was the original idea why I decided to build Rally, and I thought it could be like thought there was room to improve there. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, one question that I must ask in the spirit of developer memes: how did you deal with time zones here? Was that like a major pain point at some point?
Yeah, that was so. In the first version of Rally, it completely slipped my mind, I guess, and I did not handle them very well at all. I realized afterwards, like all the issues that come along when people started using it from, having tested it only myself or with people who are in the same time zone as me. I didn't realize what the issues were. But now, in this new version, I've taken a lot more care into making sure that, people are seeing the correct times. And originally I was using like date functions to help with that, but I've recently switched to date.js, which do a pretty good job of simplifying things. And yeah, it's just basically what I'm doing to kind of help with that is when I store stuff in the database, I I store the times without the time zone and the time zone separately. That way I can always easily modify. I can always get the original time zone that the user has entered, and then I can kind of adjust based on the user's time zone, what they're seeing.
Nice. Yeah, in one of my first jobs, I also had a job where I had to deal with time zones. It was like I was working at a company that was building a cloud platform for streaming from, or like for streams of IP cameras, and to actually store these in a proper video format with start and ending and all that. I also had to fiddle around with the time zones, and my head was smoking afterwards. It was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was one of the hardest things when it comes to this product, like just figuring out how to deal with time zones and making sure people are seeing the right times.
Yeah.
And one of the toughest challenges I had was I had to migrate people over from the first version of Rally, which was the MongoDB database where the dates were being stored with time zones already. I needed to migrate them over to this new version, and that was quite tough. I had to get quite creative there with what I was doing. I'm not sure if I took the right approach, but it's been long enough now, and I think no one's really complained, so I think it worked out pretty well.
Great. All right, we have seen the nice, beautiful looking face of your app. So, like, maybe you can show us a little bit.
The new, because I think I mentioned this previously, but so this is I'm working on a new version now that kind of refreshes the UI. I guess one of the things about the app is I never really intended it to grow all that much. It was kind of a simple idea, and the interface is like is quite nice for what it does, but it doesn't leave a lot of room to grow. So now I'm kind of working on a new version, which I can kind of maybe, let's see. Yeah, so the new version kind of gives you more ability to kind of manage a number of polls, and it also kind of has like a bit more better handling for when you have like lots of options and lots of participants.
Right.
So
that looks so nice. What are you using for the styling library?
It's Tailwind.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah. So it just adds a few more pages so that it has a bit more breathing room, so I can grow a bit more. My vision for the app is that it won't just do these meeting polls. It will also do other things like surveys, maybe booking pages. So yeah, there's a lot I want to do with it. It's just it just takes quite a bit of time to get through all this.
Of course, I think we all know this struggle. So what's the technology stack that you chose to build this app?
Yeah, so it's a Next.js app, and it's using Prisma, of course, as the RM, and TRPC to manage the API, and yeah, Tailwind for the styling.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Actually, I don't think we have talked about TRPC on this stream. So maybe if you would have to explain it in your own words, how would you describe it to your developer friends what TRPC is?
I think I would say it's the best way to get like a type safe end-to-end API. If you're really like your TypeScript, which I know I do, I don't think there's a better alternative when it comes to communicating between a client and a server. So yeah, I didn't launch with TRPC originally. I was using just a basic REST API, which was okay, but obviously, left a lot to desire when it comes to type safety. And TRPC just, it blew that out of the water. When I tried it, I thought this was so much nicer and I could move so much quicker. And I was so much more confident as well when I make changes. So I wouldn't trade it for anything else right now.
Nice. So yeah, for anyone who's never heard of it, it's basically then an alternative to a REST API or a GraphQL API, right? It's another way how your front end can communicate with your server and execute business logic server side and talk to the database server side.
Yeah, it's similar to a GraphQL API in the sense that you end up with like a single endpoint to call. Yeah, but it's just a lot. I think it's simpler in a good way. You know, it makes things. One of the things I regret is when I first started rebuilding Rally, I convinced myself that I should have a GraphQL backend, and that slowed things down quite considerably. Partly because maybe I wasn't too experienced with GraphQL, but also because I think the tooling just wasn't that great. And yeah,
Was it Prisma 1?
I mean, I did try Prisma 1, but I tried a bunch of other stuff too. I can't even remember what they were, to be honest. But I just remember not having a great experience and not wanting to even work on it. It was and that was just a killer for me. And I decided if I want to move quicker, I'm just gonna switch to a REST API because it's just simple and it won't be a blocker for me.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Would you be open to maybe showing us a little bit of the code? For example, the Prisma schema, and then maybe also, like, since we've been talking about TRPC now, I'd be curious to maybe see a few of these TRPC calls and what they look like in practice.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, this is the Prisma schema, which I think you can see right now. I don't think I'm not doing anything too advanced. I think I'm just saying that like this was quite important for me when I realized this referential integrity was an option, because like one thing that I needed to do was be able to kind of clean up old data in the database, and that usually meant deleting large numbers of records. And without this, having foreign keys in place meant the deletes would take a really long time. So switching over to like referential integrity kind of sped up all that quite a bit. And now, yeah, it works. It works really great. I basically just have I have like one workflow that runs once a day that deletes anything that's kind of inactive or that doesn't need to be there anymore.
That's so interesting. In fact, I have never seen referential integrity being used with another provider than PlanetScale. Basically, I thought that that would be the main use case for it, because PlanetScale has no support for foreign keys.
Yeah.
But I didn't even cross my mind that this would be useful on other providers as well. It's interesting to see a real life use case here.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even, I was the same way. I didn't think I'd need this, but not having foreign keys actually turns out to speed things up quite a bit when it comes to deleting large numbers of records. And yeah, I think for this app, like it's not that critical to have the the foreign keys in place. Usually, it's just I think the app does a pretty good job of maintaining the integrity itself. And it's it's worth the performance boost of using it, I think.
Right. Cool. Okay, so that's the Prisma schema, and then like what do these TRPC calls look like?
Yeah, let's see. So got source, server, and these are my routers. Let's see. Yeah, and this is kind of what it looks like. This is, for example, the call to get a poll, for example. This is where I call, use my Prisma client to get the data out of my database. And yeah, just in the end, like calling this from the client becomes so easy because I have a bunch of plugins from TRPC that like it uses a React query to generate basically a client for you.
So what you're showing there is the server-side implementation, right?
Yeah, this is the server-side implementation. And just to see like what this would look like. Poll provider. Yeah, so on the client, it would just look something like this. I'm just importing this this hook here. And you just call it like this. If you're familiar with React Query, it's basically that's all it is. And yeah,
and it's entirely type safe, so
Yeah.
like all completely typed all the way through.
And just for people who might not know, TRPC is based off of RPC, which is remote procedure calls, right? That's the correct name? So like this polls.get here, is that what would be considered a procedure then that you're reaching out to and calling?
Yeah, exactly. That would be what we were seeing before. Let's see. So yeah, these are basically all the different procedures, and they're grouped under the polls. I think if I look, where is it? Yeah, you can see you can kind of merge stuff so that you can create more like a nested kind of procedures, right? So this would be under polls or create, and then I have stuff that's related to comments. So this would be polls.comments.create, for example. So everything's kind of organized, hierarchical.
It's really cool.
Yeah, looks really nice. All right. One funny comment, by the way, from Abdu here. I think he didn't like your light theme, but I actually wanted to make, before I read this comment, I wanted to make a comment about this because we're using the same theme, Luke. I'm also using the exact same VS Code theme, and I'm a big fan of it. I'm also a light theme guy. So I can definitely go with that one. Sorry, Abdu.
I change it up quite often, so it's don't want to be in the same thing for too long.
I actually tweeted about that recently. I've always used a dark theme, but like 2 months ago, I started using a light theme, and I kind of love it. So it feels like heresy, but I really love it.
Yeah, I used dark themes for years too, and I don't know, like when I switched to a light theme, I was like, this is nice, something new, Like you look at this all day, you can't be looking at the same thing for years, right?
Spice it up a little bit. I like it. All right, we've kept you quite a bit already, so maybe let's get closer to wrapping it up. I think you're planning some bigger changes that you meant in the beginning, that you already mentioned in the beginning. Is that mostly UI wise and just expanding functionality, or are you changing some architectural things about the app in some ways as well?
In terms of like the stack, I don't think that's changing. So right now, I mean, I'm pretty happy with the stack. It's running on Vercel, like using serverless functions, and everything seems to work really well. It's more just, I want to transition from it just being like a single product to like more of a platform with like different solutions. And that means, in terms of the architecture, that might get a bit more complex. I might want to move it to like a turbo repo where I have kind of different apps rather than just this one single app right now, which is okay because there's not too much in it, but it could definitely benefit from splitting things up a bit. And I think that's kind of on the agenda pretty soon.
Nice. Luke, thank you so much for joining us today. And everybody, you can go ahead and check out this GitHub repo for Rally because it is open source. You can look at it to see how a real world application looks like that's using a modern stack with Next.js, with Prisma, with TRPC. So I think it's a very interesting kind of case study that people can study and look into a little bit more to understand how you built this. Thank you so much for coming on today. And I wish you a great rest of your day, Luke.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
All right, we are back. It's just the two of us, and here is the proper screen arrangement. And let me also remove the comment here. All right, let's talk a little bit, Sabin, about the tutorial series that you have been working on about end-to-end type safety with GraphQL, Prisma, and React. It's a series, I think, that has 4 parts in total, and 3 of them we have already released, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So, like Niko said, this is a 4-part series. And in this series, what we're doing is building a full stack application. And there's actually two pieces to it. There's the front end app and the back end app. And I've intentionally kept those two separate in completely different code repositories because I want to show how you can get end-to-end type safety between two different projects without having them in like a monorepo setting using GraphQL. And I thought it was actually really nice that Luke mentioned the tooling around GraphQL is kind of tough to work with because that's true, that it can be very confusing. And I know actually when I was setting up this tutorial, I'm not the most experienced with GraphQL. It's a little bit of a newer thing to me. I've got some good experience with it. But going through some of the tooling, I had to do a lot of research and like figure out how the little pieces work together, how all the different schemas, like the different roles they play, and how to generate types off of your GraphQL schema. So there's a lot of little things that you got to do to get it to work. And that's why I think this series is going to be so important, because I think that I've kind of melded it down into a really easy to understand overview of how to get like a production ready sort of application working in that way.
That's great. So what kind of tools did you use specifically to get this type safety? Because when I think about end-to-end type safety, what's important for me is that the types at the boundaries of the layers of my application stay coherent, right? I want that they're kind of flowing from one layer to another, and that the type safety guarantees like that they aren't lost. So how is that possible? I imagine that in this stack, this sounds like a typical kind of 3-tier architecture. You have the front end that's built with React. You have the GraphQL API in the middle, the API server, and then you have the database that's managed with Prisma. And on each of these layers, I guess you do have your types, right? You have the Prisma schema and the generated types for the database. You have the strong TypeSift system from GraphQL, and you're using TypeScript on the front end as well. But how do you make sure that, for example, when you have a request that's coming from the front end and is fetching data from the GraphQL API, how does the front end know the types that it's going to receive? And in the same way, how does the coupling between the types of my GraphQL API and the database works in this case?
Right. Yeah. So like you said, you have the 3 different parts, and that leaves 2 gaps, right, between the API, the database, and the front end. So there's 2 gaps between the two. And what I used is, obviously I used Prisma, which takes your database schema and it sort of generates types based off of that for your API. So that sort of keeps your API in sync with the database as far as the types go and the shape of your data. So that's what covers that gap up. And then I ended up using Pathos, which is a really nice GraphQL schema builder that actually has a really cool plugin with Prisma that generates, or it allows you to develop your GraphQL types in a way that's type safe with your Prisma client types. And it sort of puts precautions in place where it doesn't let you try to access fields that don't exist in your Prisma client. That way, now your GraphQL API and your backend types and your database schema are in sync. So that's 3 of the 4 pieces. And then finally, Pathos exposes a GraphQL schema, which I use GraphQL CodeGen on the front end to take that schema and generate types for the front end to use. So at that point, you get the full sort of type safety all the way across from the database to the front end using all those suite of tools.
Amazing. Did you prepare any kind of like code walkthrough or anything like this, or should we move on already to the discussion about Prisma Client Extension?
I do have the repository open, but if you're looking for a code walkthrough, I would say anybody watching, we have 3 of the 4 articles out already. And most of the code that I could show you is probably what's in those articles. So definitely go through those. We also have YouTube videos. I made videos to go along with each one. So if you'd prefer to watch it and have it explained to you, I recommend definitely watching those.
Yes, I also recommend that, mostly because the content that we're creating here, like not only your tutorial, Sabin, but also the ones from Tassin and from Alex that we have recently published on our blog, they're really, really high quality. like to me in my mind, like these are up to par with kind of content that you would otherwise pay for on platforms like Udemy. So it's really great free content that people can consume to learn about web development with with modern tooling. So I definitely encourage anybody to check these out as well. All right, then thanks for giving us that overview, Sabin, and I'll see you here in 10 seconds again to talk about Prisma client extensions. Here we go. Prisma client extensions is a new feature that we want to launch soon. And in fact, I've also talked about it at my Prisma Day talk a while ago. I'm going to drop the link to that here in the comments as well, so that you can reference it later. And I'm also going ahead and sharing my screen. Let me just very quickly prepare that. There you go. Sorry for the infinite loop here. And where is the issue again? There is the proposal. And let me also fix the name tags real quickly. There we are. Perfect. Can you see my screen, and can you see the issue for the Prisma client extensions?
Yes.
That's awesome. All right, Prisma client extensions are a new feature that we're working on, and I'm really excited about them because they will really make Prisma a lot more flexible in a lot of ways. They will fill a lot of the gaps that we have at the moment. Things like computed fields, like excluding fields, will be a breeze with that new feature. And on a high level, I think you can think of Prisma client extensions in a similar way how you think of middleware, for example, because the Prisma client middleware today, it allows you to do very sophisticated things with Prisma client already today. So you can intercept Prisma client calls, and you can modify the results of a query or the incoming query request. And you have a lot of flexibility what you can do with middleware. The big problem there is that you can't really do that in a type-safe way. And that's why we came up with this idea for Prisma client extensions that will enable similar use cases like middleware, but in a type-safe way. And it will also enable things like attaching new methods to your Prisma client instance, or new methods even to your Prisma client models, which is something that a lot of people that are maybe used to an ORM approach that's more similar to Active Record, for example, where people put business logic into their models. People who are used to that kind of approach, when they look at Prisma, it seems very foreign at first glance, because it's just this pattern where you're basically sending a query to the database and you're receiving the response afterwards, but you can't really define your own custom methods and your own business logic inside of Prisma client. And that's what becomes possible now. So, for example, if you want to have a computed field on a user model, so like say your user model looks like this, and you want to create a user model where you compute the full name of a user based on their first name and the last name. Here's how you would do it. You would use the new $extends API, which enables you to hook into these Prisma client extensions on your Prisma client instance. And then you have a number of properties which you can pass there. Result, model, client, and use is what we intend to call them. But if you think that these names can be improved, you're more than welcome to leave your feedback about this in this issue as well. And in this case, we want to modify the result of a Prisma query by adding a new field to it. And the way how we do this is we're using the result option that you can pass into extends. And then we can specify on which model we want to add this field. In this case, it's the user model. And we can then compute this computed field like this in a function that takes this callback here. And in the callback, we have access to the user object that would otherwise just be returned from the function. So for example, if I have a find unique call for user, prisma.user.findUnique, it will return a user object. This user object is what's being passed into this function and what I can modify here. So in this case, I'm adding a new object that's called full name, and I'm computing the value for that full name with this small computation here. Then it allows to attach methods to individual models. So in the default Prisma client API for the user model, for example, we would only allow you to have a create function that you can call to create a new user record in the database. But maybe you want to have a function that has a little bit more business logic. So for example, a sign-up function where ultimately you also want to create a new user in the database, but maybe you want to call out to some authentication provider, add some additional business logic for validation. And that's what you can do with these additional methods that you can now define on your models. And the result would then look like this. You can now literally use the new sign-up method that you defined like this on your user model, on your Prisma client instance. So you're extending the capabilities of your Prisma client with new functionality. It also makes it really easy to then implement things like soft deletes. It's just a lot of possibilities that are opening up there.
Yeah, I think that part there, specifically adding new functions to your instance, is huge. I know I worked at a company previously before I was at Prisma, where we were actually using Prisma with Nest.js. And we had this need where a lot of our developers came from like an active record type of background, or some of the older like ORMs for different languages. And they were wanting to know how to add classes or add functions to your different Prisma client models. So what we ended up having to do was we had to build these really big brittle classes that essentially just wrapped Prisma client and exposed the functions. And while it worked, it wasn't necessarily the best solution, because if the schema ever changed, we'd have to go update things. So this one really hits home with me. I think this one's going to provide a lot of value. And then like the example that you just mentioned at the end there, the soft deletes, I can also imagine other different things where you can sort of intercept and add maybe authentication pieces or different query filters to filter down. So it's just going to allow pretty much extensibility to the developer's imagination. So I'm excited to see what people build with it, and even packages and different things people are going to build in open source for this.
Yeah, it will become a lot more flexible, and that's what I'm looking for as well. As well. Then you can also extend your queries. So, for example, or like modify your queries really. Like for example, the like find many query on the user model, you could modify it in a way that in future executions of that particular like query, you would only query users in this case that have an age greater than 18. But like really, the way how I think about it is basically that you can override the existing queries that Prisma Client already exposes, and add some customization to them, which I think can be really useful as well sometimes. And finally, you can also extend your Prisma Client instance with entirely new methods. So in this case, here is an example of how you can implement your own kind of transaction logic. You're attaching the begin method to Prisma Client like this, and then you can call it later on in your code like this as well. All right. I think with that, I'm done talking about the Prisma Client extensions, and we'll stop sharing my screen. And yeah, I think, Sabin, We are at the hour now. I haven't seen too many questions in the comments. I think one person has been asking about issues that they had with a GraphQL resolver, it seems like. So in this case, it seems like the call didn't go through because probably the context was undefined, or the Prisma instance was undefined. So I guess there is some issue in the resolver chain. This will be impossible for us to solve here on the stream today. So I would encourage you to go to our GitHub repository, to the GitHub discussions, where we answer where we answer questions like this. And it would be great if you could add some additional context there as well. So what does your GraphQL server look like? What does your resolvers look like? All of that would be helpful context for us to help you solve this issue here.
Yeah, we've also got the community Slack too, where a lot of people are using GraphQL. And I think with some context, other people can help you too.
Yes, exactly. And then there was one more question by Mark. Are there any videos on Prisma relationships? I still struggle with that. That's a really good question. I don't think we have videos about relationships in particular, but it would be really interesting to know also what your questions specifically are there, Mark. So I would also encourage you to also go to the GitHub discussions actually and post your questions there. We have a support team that's monitoring the GitHub discussions and is regularly responding to questions there. And you can also, again, also share that question on the Prisma Slack, and community members will be able to help you out there as well. So I encourage you to go there and try to find some answers in the community. And of course, also feel free to reach out to us developer advocates with these questions in the future as well.
Yeah, and I've been doing like a little series of short videos explaining just simpler concepts in sort of a short form, so it's quick and to the point. And I actually have relationships sort of on my list of topics I want to cover. So maybe I'll bump that up a little bit and try to work on that sooner than later.
Nice.
And try to get something out there.
And that would be even more motivation for you, Mark, to actually let us know what your questions are, so that Sabin can make sure that he answers these questions in his videos.
Yeah.
All right, Sabin, thank you so much for joining me today on the stream. I think that was very nice. I really enjoyed the conversation we had with Luke. Really enjoyed learning about your GraphQL tutorial series. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you back here soon again.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See ya.